Welcome back to Activista Rise Up. I'm your host, Dr. Patricia Campos-Medina. You can listen to this podcast on all my social media platforms. Activista Rise Up is about leaders, what inspires them to take action, what keeps them going, despite difficult and trying situations that leaders find themselves sometimes. By listening to their story, we hope that you get inspired to take action. Today, you will meet one of those amazing young visionary leaders, organizers, someone who I had the pleasure to witness, learn from as we were battling support for essential workers who were undocumented during the pandemic. She led the fight and the struggle to organize a coalition of immigrant rights justice groups in New York State who pushed for the Excluded Workers Fund and brought in an unprecedented level of support for those workers, inspiring many other states, including here in New Jersey, to take on the fight and demand that essential workers who are undocumented and kept us alive during the pandemic. And I say alive because they did. Many of us were able to stay home because they were working. And it was our responsibility to make sure that they were taken care of, at least a little bit, for the sacrifice that they made. So that leader is Angeles Solis, who is a lead organizer with a very impressive organization who's leading the way in workplace justice organizing with immigrant workers, Made the Road New York. Angeles Solis, welcome to Activista Rise Up. Good morning. Thank you for coming. I know that you are in the middle of another New York State crisis with the air pollution, and you have been moved from your office. So thank you for making the time. So tell me where you're at right now, and introduce yourself to my listeners, who will be more than excited to hear, how New Yorkers we're surviving this other crisis with air pollutants on the air.
Yes. Well, I'm here in downtown New York City, up in Hoking Land, and the air quality is the worst it's been in generations, right? And I think to set the tone for this podcast, we know who's to blame for the climate crisis. We know who is to blame for the air quality here. We know that major polluters and CEOs and fossil fuel moguls are behind this crisis, and it's impacting low-wage workers. I'm looking at construction workers outside right now who don't have PPE on despite this air quality issue. I'm thinking about our folks back home, our kids at school.
It's a good start to this conversation because, we talked about the pandemic and what happened to essential workers, but the other day I was also thinking about the same thing. Medical community says stay indoors, don't go outside, if you don't have to. But a lot of low-wage workers have to go outside and work. Yeah, so I know that Make the Road New York is at the center of making sure that workers are safe when they're on the street. So why don't you tell us who is Make the Road New York and what is the role that you play there in making sure that these kinds of issues, are actually addressed with the workers on the front lines?
Yeah. So Make the Road New York, that's my employer. I'm a lead organizer of the Workplace Justice Team. We are one of the largest community organizations in the country, and we do place-based organizing, which means we organize in the communities in which our offices are located, right? And we also have sister organizations across 5 states. We fight for tenants, we fight for workers, for immigrants, for our youth, for our elderly. We fight to take on the real polluters and looters of this planet, like Jeff Bezos and the billionaires. We're building coalitions and building power in New York State to take back what's ours, to tax the rich, and put real investment into communities to make sure that we're happy and healthy and whole.
I know Make the Road New York is part of a national organization that works together with those issues. We do have, I'm very active with Make the Road New Jersey, which is making impressive work here in New Jersey as well. And you have a very impressive career as an organizer and doing different projects, working from the anti-sweatshop movement, which is also when I got my start on the 90s, and then doing other policy work. So what got you into organizing immigrant workers?
Yeah. Well, I think for many of us, it starts in the home, right? I'm proud to say that I'm the daughter of a LIUNA member, of a construction worker. My dad is 69, still working in construction. My mother is a migrant nurse with OSME, and in the home, I would see how both of my parents, because they were in the union, were able to show up to my soccer games, were able to take time off. We had health insurance. So being in a union household literally changed my life. And then being in a union household in a community of primarily farm workers in Eastern Washington, where Yakima and Othello, or these massive agricultural corporations were just driving down the standards of living. Even just growing up in that context, everybody knew who the bosses were. Everybody knew who the workers were. We knew who was winning. We knew who was losing. So the concept of power and our own power and who creates the power started in my home, in my household.
Awesome. Um, I like how you said that in communities like the ones you grew up, you knew who the boss was because they set the tone for everything that happens in those communities. And despite those odds, workers are always trying to figure out how to organize and win and change the working conditions. What is a campaign that you are most proud of as an organizer and as a leader of union leaders? Because I mean I hear you talking about your parents being union members and having been able to instill in you that pride. What is the campaign, if you had one campaign, because you have led many impressive organizing wins, but what is one campaign that you're very proud of, and what do you think you learned from it, and what was the key for winning?
Mm. I mean, yes, at 30 years old, I'm happy to say and really honored that so many of the moments that I've been able to organize in just had the right conditions that led us to victory. And it's a good question, the key to winning. Um, I mean, out of all of them, of course, I'm gonna have to say the Fund Excluded Workers campaign. As we mentioned at the beginning of the call, this was completely underestimated, completely unprecedented. We were demanding unemployment insurance for undocumented people, for people leaving incarceration, for those that pay into the system of unemployment but can't access a cent. And at the peak of the pandemic, unemployment was everywhere, right? Like millions of people were waiting for their unemployment checks. The Department of Labors were backlogged across the country. We had the pandemic unemployment assistance. Unemployment was literally the way that people were putting food on the table. But there was also millions of people of excluded workers who didn't have that privilege, didn't have that right. So in 2020, we began organizing with street vendors and day laborers and construction workers and service workers and laundry and undocumented workers, and educating around this. And we started in the pantry lines, asking people who have been in this country for 20, 15, 30 years without status. How does it feel that you have contributed, that you have paid this much into the system, that you actually are paying more taxes at a higher tax bracket than some of these billionaires, and you're not getting anything in return? And that was an agitating moment. And the key to winning, I have to say that myself as one of the lead organizers on that campaign. There's plenty of others: Bianca Guerrero, Zach Lerner, Karina Gutierrez, so many incredible, Jorge Torres, Nadia Molina, who we all sat around the table and said, this is very unlikely. What we're asking for from the state, billions of dollars in cash relief, not just a voucher, not assistance, but direct money right back in the hands of our people's pockets. We had to believe that we had to win. We couldn't entertain not winning. Our people were suffering. There was too much struggle on the line. There was too much on the line. So we had to believe we had to win. And then we had to ask the right questions every single step of the way. What move is going to get us closer to that vote? What power do we need to move in order to get us there? And the single biggest thing I think that was notable in the campaign was our direct action. Despite the dangers of the pandemic, we kept our people safe. We shut down the Manhattan and the Brooklyn Bridge at the same time. And our members put their bodies on the line for a 23-day hunger strike. They didn't eat in order to bring attention to the governor and to the state that while they were safe at home, they couldn't provide for themselves or for their family. And we were able to win that. On the eve of our 23rd day of a hunger strike. So I'm gonna say, don't think that you can lose.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I
there's a
mean,
lot more to that story.
of course, but I think it's important to where you started, which it says that in order to win, you have to first believe that you can win, and bring people along to also believe that and be willing to put their bodies on the line and their organization's credibility on the line to make sure that the sacrifices the members are making are worthwhile. So I like how you said we couldn't lose. We could because we believe we could win. So thank you for that inspiration. And in that sense, I feel like another thing you said that the pandemic was a moment to agitate people to understand their own power because they were keeping everybody else working, so they have power, right? And that creates the hope that you mentioned before, and also created this momentum for agitation. If what in I mean, pandemics is one thing, thing. Hopefully, we won't have another pandemic, another moment like that. But it's a moment for agitation. Once the moment is past, and we are getting into this period of backlash again against immigrants and people of color and Asian Americans and the undocumented, and it feels bleak again. What what gives you hope that we are gonna turn around this anti-immigrant rhetoric in this country? What keeps you organizing and keeps you making sure that workers are committed to their own liberation in a way? Because this is, and that we have leaders that are also committed to continue to helping them. So what gives you hope that we can make this turn around?
I feel like I've both heard and answered this question so many times, and I, I think I could give like a range of a flowery response, but to really just be blunt, I stay in it because if the people that I'm fighting for and with are making the choice to continue, so do I. Like if they have, kids at home that need them and they have multiple jobs that they're working and they got to find a way to do it and to be okay and they're finding a way to stick in the fight, then I have no excuse either. So that's really been it. These last few weeks, I'm approaching now 12 years of being in organizing spaces and yeah, if our members are finding the willpower to get up every day and to believe that things can change, then it's my responsibility to help create the container to make that possible. Um, yeah, our community, our membership, our actions, our ideology, our principles, la arroz y pollo en las oficinas,
Yeah.
our kids coming out to the actions. And honestly, just last week, someone spoke and shared their testimony for the first time in front of a city council member. And they were so nervous and their hands were shaking. And we prepped and we told the story. And I've done that 1,000 times también, but it just reconnected me like, wow, I forget how important it is, how incredible it is, that first moment that somebody reconnects to their own power and says, actually, my story does matter. What happened to me matters. And me speaking up so it doesn't happen again matters. So it's those little moments, and it's paying attention to the smallest moments, not just the big wins, not just the big policy wins, but the tiny moments where our community members are reclaiming and seeing and owning their power and then building from there. That's what's been giving me fuel lately. And as we know, the descent of fascism is like soon coming, and Trump's still running for office, and the threat is still very present. So it's even more important to pay attention to those tiny moments of actually, you know what, regardless of what's happening out there, we take it into account and we keep ourselves steady and strong, and we do that in a ripple effect with others around us.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think it's important as organizers to remember that, like you said, it's not just the big wins that keep us going. It's those little victories, right? It's the
Yes.
little progress then that we see on workers uh, finding their own voice and their own power. So I want to elevate that because I feel the same way, when I'm exhausted because it feels like we fight the same battles over and over again. But it's okay because along the way, we bring other people along and we empower other people along. But it is, there is a lot of burnout in organizing. We women do suffer from that burnout, because we take the stories that we hear, we take them very personally. And we also come from working class families, and we have to provide for ourselves. So what would you say to a young organizer who is feeling perhaps burned out and thinking that we're not winning, like things are not changing, they're getting worse? Like, how do you take care of yourself in those moments of self-doubt? Because we have them. Um,
Mm-hmm.
uh, so what do you say to someone who's going through that moment
Yeah.
that has helped you? Because I mean, I've gone through my moments in which I said, "Oh my God, here we are again." So
Yeah.
what do you say to somebody?
On an individual level, you always have your breath. Always have your breath. Whether you're running around Albany or whether you're like counting bagels for the march, whatever it is, you always have your breath. And I feel like you're exactly right. We are absorbing the traumas. We are absorbing the heaviness of the work that we're fighting up against. And at the same time, we're trying to create spaces of joy, create spaces of liberation, create spaces of learning, and keep focused on that possibility. It's a lot on someone's shoulders, on an organizer's shoulder. So in those little moments, hold on to your breath. In the bigger moments, stay humble. And then community care and boundaries. It's really important that the people that you organize with have close, meaningful, significant relationships that are focused on learning, but do not necessarily make them your best friends either. It is important to also separate, to young organizers out there, your identity as an organizer with who you are as a human being in this world. Um, and I think that even myself, when I think of Angeles, the next definition of who I am tends to be organizer. But I'm also a sister. I'm also a partner. I'm also a friend. I also like to play soccer. I'm also a jaranera. Like, it's really important to be able to hold the duality of all you are, and I wish someone would have told that to me when I was younger. Like, being an organizer is not all you are. It's a huge part of who you are, but you also have choice and autonomy in that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I also uh, tell young organizers, because something that helped me is that we don't have to have all the answers. Sometimes
Yes.
we think that because people see us as leaders or having answers, that we have to have them. And I think that the most humbling thing that we can learn is not to take all the responsibility of finding solutions. That the way to find solutions is in the collective, right?
Yes. Yes.
And bringing everybody along in the process of finding solutions that also creates community for ourselves, but it also relieves the pressure of having to have all the answers, because we're just human beings, like like
Yes.
like everybody else. So how do you go about building community? I know that you got a lot of campaigns happening. There's a lot of organizing happening in New York State right now that you are at the forefront of. So why don't you tell me a little bit of those campaigns? Because that's part of building community, right? There's fights that we have, and in the middle we find other fights that we must have. So that's part of building community. What are you working on right now?
So we have quite a bit on the table right now. One of the biggest campaigns that we're running is the Secure Jobs Act campaign, which is not a radical idea, but we're just fighting for employers to just have to provide a justification or reason for letting a worker go. It's very common law in the majority of countries around the world, but here in the US, we do not have protections for an employee or even anything required from the employer as to why they're being let go. So folks can be arbitrarily fired for no reason. And we know that when an employer is forced to provide a justified explanation for termination, it opens up the doors for workers to be able to freely organize in dangerous conditions, to speak up without fear of being let go. So we're hopeful that we can pass it at the New York City Council level and hopefully even see that in other cities and states. We're pushing for, again, permanent unemployment insurance for cash workers, for undocumented workers, people in reentry. At the state level, at the federal and the national level, we're still taking on, major corporations and holding polluters and major CEOs accountable for the harms that they're doing to our people and our planet. And in all of that, to wrap it up, what has been most important, and I think going back to your key to winning, there's like the key to winning the policy, and then like even if you don't win the policy at the end, how do you still reflect on it as a win? Right?
Yeah.
We're so sometimes set in the like you either won this bill or you didn't. You lost the campaign or you didn't. That person got the seat or didn't. But reframing winning, joy, centering joy has been so critical in so many of our campaigns. We have mariachis, we have tambores, we have bailes, we have ceremony at our actions. It is not just about getting out there and yelling and then going home and feeling exhausted after yell. But it's like I'm a chant, I'm gonna hear my voice, and I'm also gonna hear some drums. So we've really been integrating joy into our organizing work lately, and I think it's made a big difference.
And that's how you build a collective, just build a community, right? Celebrating a culture and bringing all of who we are to the struggle. You said, how do you define a win? But I will ask you, how do you define power in the context of immigrant worker organizing? You as a leader, like, what's your vision of creating power? Because I think that differentiates who is a leader for the collective and who's a leader. So something that you talked about right now made me think about a question. You said, how do we define wins? And so it made me think about how do we, as immigrant right justice organizers, how do we define power? How do you define power in this work?
I have two answers. My short answer and my long answer. My short answer of power in this work is, you have your power when your opponent is afraid to say no to you. Point blank period. Now, that power is more nuanced. And as an organizer, I want to be able to ask questions that help us measure power. For example, how do you bring an analysis of race and class and gender to the word? How do you make sure you're not just living in theory, but also in action? How do you balance both? Can you move people from fear to action? Can you listen? Are you willing to admit when you've gone wrong? Are you willing to confront others when they've gone wrong? I've always had, in the generation of like organizing, a small decade of organizing, power has looked in so many different ways. It's been very loud, but there's also soft power. There's also, the power that comes from community members being able to listen to each other and to politicize each other in spaces that aren't quite as visible, right? And how that actually leads to the shutdowns of the bridges. How it was, what's happening to us isn't okay. It started with the conversations in kitchens and over the kitchen tables and the calls with organizers, and that bubbles up into the giant hunger strikes and the bridge shutdowns and the big billion-dollar wins. So I think it's really important to recognize that power is a very wide spectrum and a scale, and to bring value to that at the most minute to the largest as well.
I think it's Dr. Cornel West who talks that for people who are in the struggle for social justice and economic justice and racial justice, power has to equate to love and creating, loving the who you are as an individual in the struggle, right? Because if we don't have love for the stories of people, love for who the people are, we can really stick to this fight. So that just made me think about Cornel West when he said that the struggle for economic justice is about love and love for the stories of people. Yeah. Which brings back to what you talked about. What gives you hope is keeps you going is the narrative. When workers can actually find their own voice and their power, because that's also power. I think that's what we need to do more of when encourage people who are supposed to be marginalized and not have power feel that they do. I think that's the real key to this work. So how can people continue to support the work that Make the Road New York does to build power for working people?
Well, you can follow us on Twitter, on Instagram, on Facebook. You can go to Make the Road New York online. All of our handles are Make the Road NY. So just stay in touch with our campaigns. You can always reach out to get involved, and whether it's like volunteering at our food pantry, especially on days like this, or getting involved and making calls to legislators or supporting our community members. There's always room in the movement.
So my last question, and now we have a lot of worker organizing, a lot of young people getting involved in the movement. What attracted you to the movement, and what would you tell a young person in high school or going to college why they should get involved in organizing?
Well, one, even after you graduate or even before people graduate, they tend to get a job. And I think you getting a job is one of the first opportunities where you can learn about your own power and why you need to be educated on your rights, a lot of folks don't know that they're supposed to be paid overtime, sick pay, that they have rights at work if their employer tries to harass them or intimidate them. And it does not matter how young or old you are, it is your right. And I think in the workplace is one of the first places where folks and young folks can start to recognize their power, educate others around their working rights, and also start learning about like unionism and community organizing and the different structures at play that particularly keep young low-wage workers indebted to student debt, to credit card debt, to and also the how that ripples up to their family, right? So usually my first answer, because most people are trying to either go to college, pay off college debt, and get a job. And
Yeah. Yeah.
that's where you're at. You gotta know. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, thank you for those words of wisdom. I think that we need, this is an exciting moment. There's a whole new generation of young organizers coming out of this moment of union organizing, of the mobilization against student debt. So I invite everybody to learn more about the work of Make the Road New York and to follow Angeles Solis and the work that she's leading and how she got into this movement, because I think that that's the key part that we're trying to talk about at Activista Rise Up, that we need your passion, we need your vision, and we need the energy so that we can keep regenerating the circles of social justice warriors. That's what I call them. So thank you, Angeles, for sharing your wisdom and for making yourself available to have this conversation with us at Activista Rise Up. Be safe in New York. You hear it. Power is about inspiring people who feel that they don't have a voice and remind them that they have a voice. Power is about inspiring the next generation of leaders to take action, organize, and change the world. Join us here at Activista Rise Up, and let's continue taking action for social and economic justice. Thank you for joining.